Well, good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us today. I'd first like to acknowledge the members of our Board of Regents who are able to join us today. In addition to the Chair of the Board, Sue Sharkey, we have Vice Chair Jack Crowell and Regents Irene Griego, Leslie Smith, Glenn Gallegos, and Heidi Ganal. This is a really important day and an important opportunity for our campus community to hear from Mark Kennedy, who is the finalist for the President of the University of Colorado, and to ask him our questions. Just a bit of background on Mark, that he grew up in Minnesota, started his career in the private sector, working for companies including Pillsbury, Federated Department Stores, Shopko Stores, and Department 56. He then served 3 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives. He has an experience as an academic leader at George Washington University, where he was professor and director of the Graduate School of Political Management. Mark currently serves as president of the University of North Dakota. Woo, that'd be dangerous, wouldn't it? University of North Dakota. His full resume is on the Presidential Search website at cu.edu. We're also pleased to have Debbie Kennedy, Mark's wife, with us here this afternoon. The format for the forum today is that Chair Sharkey will make some opening remarks, and then Mark will then take a few moments to share some additional background about himself and his interest in becoming the next president of the University of Colorado. Chair Sharkey will then facilitate the initial question and answer period. She will ask 4 questions that have been submitted from CU Denver faculty, staff, and students. We actually had dozens of questions that were submitted in advance, and I worked with our faculty assembly leaders, staff council, and student government leaders to select those that we believe are representative of those submitted. After Mark responds to those questions, then the floor will be open for questions from all of you. There are staff members with microphones who will come towards you if you are interested in asking a question, and if you'd move to one of these 2 aisles. And the folks who have the mics are Leanna and Zach. And so if you would just acknowledge or know where they are so that you can get their attention, that would work out well. To maximize the number of individuals who can ask questions, we ask that you keep those questions succinct. And after you ask the question, our Leanna and Zach will move to the next person to be ready for them to ask their question. Some of you have mentioned that you have questions about the search process. We only have an hour with Mark today, and so I encourage you to focus your questions to Mark about the things that he can respond to, because the search process is something that has not been under his purview. After today's forum, I also encourage you to fill out the feedback form that is on the cu.edu website. Tomorrow morning, we will send out an email with a recording of today's session, as well as a link to the feedback form. And that feedback will be forwarded directly to the Board of Regents before they are convening again to make any decisions about the presidential search process. I ask that we conduct this forum in the spirit of respect, professionalism, and open inquiry that defines us as the CU Denver community. It's now my pleasure to introduce the chair of our Board of Regents, Sue Sharkey.
Thank you. Thank you, Chancellor Harrell, and thanks for that from all of you. I want to thank you for being here today. This is really an important opportunity for you to get to know Mark Kennedy a little bit better, and I also want to thank Mark for being here as well and providing this opportunity to our campuses. I wanted to take a moment to let everyone know that earlier this week we sent out an email to the faculty, the staff, and the students describing in detail the presidential search process that I hope answers any questions about how we got here and where we are today. With that, today our focus is on getting to know Mark and to ask and allow him to answer your questions. Mark, if you could take a few minutes, let us know about yourself and why you'd like to be the next president of the University of Colorado.
Well, thank you, Chair Sharkey. Thanks, everybody, for coming here and exploring this very important decision as to who will be the next president of the University of Colorado. This is a great university. I am very excited about being the Regents finalist for this position. And before I take your questions, which I'm looking forward to doing, I want to first give a little background on myself, talk about the values that animate me, and tell you what you can expect from me. I am a first-generation college grad that washed dishes at a bakery, pumped gas at a bait shop to be that first generation from my family to go to college. And the opportunities that opened for me were unbelievable, that would have never otherwise been available to me. Being treasurer of today's Macy's, being U.S. Congressman, being presidential trade advisor under both Presidents Bush and Obama, having a peer-reviewed book from Columbia University, teaching at Johns Hopkins, leading a school at George Washington University, now leading the University of North Dakota. And my passion is opening up those opportunities for other students, particularly first-generation students. Debbie and I have 4 fabulous children. We love them all equally. CU has 4 fabulous campuses, but when it comes to advancing that passion for opening up to more first-generation students, CU Denver, with almost half of your freshman class being first generation, with half of them being Pell Grants, with more than half of them being from diverse communities, is a wonderful university that I look forward to being associated with and helping in any way I can. To be the leader of a system as complex and of scope of the University of Colorado, I believe, in my experience in leadership at universities has shown that you need to have the academic experience, the business experience, and the political engagement experience. I started out at Pillsbury, helping them to buy a little company called Haagen-Dazs, and then spread it around the world. At what is today's Macy's, which is as large of a company as any in Colorado, I helped them, was part of the senior management team that made them into the largest department store retailer. When I went into Congress, I went from managing budgets in the tens of billions to the trillions. And I only got there by building a coalition big enough that it overcome the 1 in 100 odds of defeating a 4-term incumbent. Not just reaching out to people from my own party, but to independents and those in the other party. When I got to academia, I learned from the bottoms up. And I believe that teaching at Johns Hopkins made me a better school leader at George Washington. And being a school leader at George Washington made me a better university leader at University of North Dakota. And I believe having been a campus leader will make me a better system leader here at the University of Colorado. At UND, we faced a 30% cumulative cut in state funding, as well as a 2-decade logo controversy, but I still unified the campus around a shared vision that has led to transformative results. A 10 percentage point improvement in the 4-year graduation rate, a jump in research, hundreds of $millions of investments, most of it private, on campus to renew the campus, record fundraising year coming up, new protections for sexual orientation, gender identity, and political belief, and us being named by U.S. News one of the 25 most innovative universities in the country. So I have the experience as to how you lead a multi-billion-dollar operation like we have here at CU, how you make those difficult decisions, how you pull people together, how you transform research universities. That's about me. What's my animating principles? My animating principles is that life is a game of addition, not subtraction. We're better off working in a collaborative way to multiply our efforts rather than to descend into division. And if you've looked at my life, it has shown that. A strong bipartisan record while I was in Congress, and during my periods in business and in academia, which is the most of my life, I've checked my politics at the door and embraced unified values that the whole organization that I'm working for can embrace. I have also worked in a collaborative fashion. If you look at my 9 years in academia, they would show that I have truly been embracing of diversity and inclusivity and been a leader for all. I need to be that moral leader for the overall university, and those principles need to include inclusivity being a hallmark, a competitive differentiation for University of Colorado. When I if I leave University of North Dakota, I will have left George Washington University and University of North Dakota with the leadership being more diverse in terms of gender, in terms of race, in terms of sexual orientation. I am fully committed, and my experience throughout academia has shown that I am going to be a strong supporter with your faculty, staff, students, university community members, that I'm going to be supportive and respectful of your dignity no matter who you love or how you identify yourself. When it comes to DACA students, I will be a strong advocate for not only DACA students, but making sure that we bring the best and the brightest from around the world right here to CU, and we need to do even better, because reaching out to those diverse communities that you do so well here is going to take a lot of energy to make sure that we can provide the financial support and the student services support to get you to graduation, whether we're talking the Hispanic, the African American, the Asian, the indigenous communities, but also going beyond where it makes sense in highly competitive programs, affirmative action to go beyond affirmative action to affirmative outreach, and making sure we have the financial aid and that we're reaching out to those communities that may never have thought that education at this level was for them. What is my focus going to be? My focus is going to be on the 4 priorities that were established by the regions. First, fiscal sustainability. A big part of my time will be raising money, whether it be from the state, from the federal government, or from donors. Secondly, making sure that we keep a CU education affordable and accessible, not just to the traditional coming out of high school students, but making sure that we're also meeting the needs of the single mom that wants to better her career, or the 53-year-old laid-off worker that wants to find a new path. Third, student success, working with the chancellors to make sure that we're doing everything we can to help graduation rates. And I will fully respect each level of the leadership, making sure that the chancellors are leading their universities, making sure that we're embracing academic freedom and freedom of expression. And fourth, driving that innovative research and economic impact that the university has. My goal is to not just unify the University of Colorado, but also reach out to CSU, the other universities, the community colleges, to come out with a unified vision as to how we're going to advance higher education in this state to deliver discovery and the talent that the state needs, to be a strong advocate for the mission that you have here at CU Denver. When I was young, you can imagine that John F. Kennedy was one of the leaders that I most admired. And he inspired his generation to put a man on the moon, and CU played a part. If I'm honored to be affirmed as your president, know that I will be devoted to working in a collaborative way to let every student achieve their personal moonshot, whatever their dream might be, and to helping our faculty advance new frontiers so we can unlock even more discovery for our state and elevate further the ranks of CU amongst the world's greatest universities. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here today.
Mark, thank you. Now, I'm going to start with the 4 questions. And before I ask Mark this first question, I would like for the audience to know that Mark has not seen these questions in advance, so he won't be rehearsed and prepared for the answers. And also, this is the first time I've seen the question. So if I stumble over the words a little, it's because I'm just reading them for the first time. So, you have stated, Mark, that your vision of leadership for the university will be derived from the ground up, inclusive of CU faculty, staff, and students. Your congressional voting record has made some members of our community feel marginalized and isolated. Given this, how will you reconcile your own personal beliefs with your ability to be a leader who can engage, advocate for, and represent the interest of all members of our community?
So let me just say, we had a great conversation with the collaborative governance, and they implored upon me that I need to be the moral leader for the university. I am going to set that moral standard, but I'm going to set the moral standards on things that are essential to being a university. There are some issues we may disagree on. There might be some issues that it's 50-50. You can't lead on 50-50 issues, but 2 of the issues that are absolutely vital for me to be strong on are inclusivity, making sure that we are welcoming everybody from the community to CU, and that is a competitive advantage for us, and also making sure that when it comes to the immigrants, students, and community here in Colorado and around the country that are being disadvantaged with no fault of their own because we as a country can't come together and figure out an immigration policy, I will be a strong advocate for those, and those are amongst the values that I believe we all share and all should share that I will be strongly supportive of.
All right. You just touched on this, but what is your position on the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, known as DACA, policy? Please provide examples of how you would embrace, protect, and advance the education of CU Denver's diverse student population, including documented and undocumented immigrants, international students, and members of our traditionally underrepresented groups.
So let me just first of all say that I am a strong supporter of us reaching out to the greatest extent possible to our DACA students and all of our immigrants, documented or undocumented. I'll be a strong supporter of pushing to make sure that the rights are maintained, and I'll do everything within my power as president of the University of Colorado to prevent anybody from doing anything otherwise. If you look at my voting record, in this case, I had a bill that wanted to have hospitals be required to report undocumented workers before providing care. I voted against that bill. There was a vote that was whether or not we would let matricular cards from Mexican government be allowed for identity in America. Many people didn't want it to be allowed. I voted to allow it to be used as a form of identity. We had a bill on whether or not we would extend the time for immigrants to stay in the country pursuing their path to citizenship. I voted to extend the time. We've had a bill as to whether to lower the standards, the penalties, and the duration of those penalties. If you were found in the country undocumented, I voted to lower the standards, and I authored a bill to help one of my constituents that was unfairly treated by immigration to adjust their economic status, so their immigration status. So I have a strong track record of wanting to embrace all in this country. We need to make sure that we're reaching out to those diverse communities that have not had education available to them, but that requires more than just having a passion for that. When you look at the diverse communities, many of them first generation, they are going to be less able to pay, and they're going to require more support to get to the graduation if you look at statistics. That's a huge financial hurdle that is going to be one of the top 5 things that I'm going to animate the university to try to figure out a better way to do. How do we get the financial model working that we can reach out and provide the kind of financial aid and support they need? That's not an easy answer. It's going to be one of the ones that I'm going to be keeping myself and the community focused on how we can do a better job of solving.
All right. Over the past couple of weeks, numerous concerns about your selection have been raised by the CU community, including students, faculty, staff, and alumni, as well as other members of the Colorado community at large. Given these concerns, what actions would you take moving forward to ensure that your presidency will be an asset to CU?
My focus, assuming that I am selected and affirmed next week, is the first priority is to reach out to everybody to make sure that I understand all your concerns, all your hopes, all your visions, starting with the regents, working down to the chancellors, to the leadership of the universities, but the faculty and staff and students, just as I've done this week, and to the broader community. I've gone to the legislature for the 3rd time today, met with the governor's leadership team. We'll be reaching out to the business community and the other community partners we have, because my goal is to unify us in a shared vision as to how we can deliver more opportunity that education unlocks for people here in Colorado and elsewhere, and to driving us up even further amongst the ranks of the most impactful research universities in the country.
So this is the 4th question. The University of Colorado is made up of 4 unique and distinctive campuses. Based on what you know at this point, how do you believe CU Denver's specific teaching, research, and service mission contributes to and strengthens the CU brand?
I think CU Denver they're all jewels. What does CU Denver bring that the others don't? They bring a very significant outreach to communities that have not always had education available to them. I think we can even do more than that, and that's going to be my goal. So in terms of that outreach, one of my two passions, I think this is a fabulous university that I want to be supportive of in any way I can. The other thing we find is that, as your chancellor says, we're on a relatively small dance floor with a lot of people dancing in this relatively small area of Denver. How do we differentiate ourselves from Metropolitan, from other universities in the area? Us being the research university downtown is a key part of what we do for differentiation. And I also will look for opportunities to see whether there are ways that we can tie back and forth across the campuses, get more undergraduate research opportunities at Anschutz for our pre-health students here at CU Denver, and other ways where we can lift up both of those. But you should be proud of who you are. You are a very important part of CU, and this is a great university that I look forward to being associated with.
All right. Now I'm going to open up the questions to the audience. There are staff members in the aisles with microphones. They will come to you if you raise your hand, and please assist them by stepping over to the aisle. We won't have lines up and down these stairs, but when they point to you, if you could step over to the aisle. But meanwhile, if you would please remain seated until we have someone with a staff member come over and tap you. So with that, we're going to start right over here with Leanne.
Hi, my name is Rachel Bates-Wilford, and I am a proud University of North Dakota alumna. And I would love to hear your thoughts, more specifically, on how you navigated the extremely contentious mascot issue while also continuing to raise in the 8 figures in private support.
How do you do it? Well, first of all, some donors are very attached to the logo, some are not. You focus on raising money on those that isn't as much of an impediment. So we just, for example, recently got a $20 million donor on my 4th visit to visit that donor to get a $20 million match from the state to advance our $70 million business school that we've been trying to do for a decade. And it's that outreach and working with your most successful alums, sometimes not alums, to help them fulfill their philanthropic goals. I would say that one of the ways you do that is you have a strategic plan that is animating not just the people on campus, but animates the donor as well. It's based on a limited number of core values, which includes both inclusivity and diversity, and animates them towards achievement of a limited number of goals, which also includes diversity. And they're excited to see people moving in a common direction. That's why that other question about how do I get us unified is so important. We got to get unified so we can get donors excited about the direction that CU is moving.
Hello, my name is Thomas Beck. I'm a chair of the Campus Ethnic Diversity Committee. And on behalf of the committee, I would like to ask you the following question. If you become president of CU, what is your plan to expand student, faculty, and staff diversity inclusion?
First of all, if we had a goal, I would make that a goal for diversity. When you're talking about student, staff, and faculty diversity, is that what the question was? Seems to me we're very diverse as it relates to students. You have to do an extra effort for outreach for recruiting. I'm going to put that challenge to the group, and I think when I come up with 5 big challenges, that's one of them. I don't want to get contentious with everybody any more than I already have. But for example, we at the University of North Dakota have a hire from within first before you go outside. We are not as diverse as we need to be as a staff and a faculty, but that's one thing you need to look at. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but that's one thing that could be an impediment. The second thing, one of the things we started was to start training for all search committees for faculty on subconscious that you really don't understand, that you need to look past that subconscious to understand and embrace diversity. So I have, in North Dakota, left North Dakota more diverse in terms of race, sex, and sexual orientation, and I'm confident we can do it here.
Hi, Vivian Hsu. I'm a faculty member in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences and president of UC Delhi, which is the association that represents all non-tenure track faculty on our campus. At UND, I see that you had some full-time non-tenure faculty, non-tenure line faculty and a small percentage of adjunct lecturers, only about 6%. The landscape is very different here. On our downtown campus, the vast majority, 67% of our faculty in the classrooms and online are not on the tenure track. We have upwards of 800 non-tenure track faculty on what we call here the instructional track, and this includes over 550 part-time lecturers. On our campus, these instructional faculty teach the vast majority of our students, especially those in our critical early, undergraduate, lower division courses. We have some of our most vulnerable faculty on the front lines teaching our most vulnerable students. With that, so, what are your strategic initiatives to generate and invest resources specifically committed to ensuring the high quality of the full teaching force and thus the quality of a CU Denver education, to provide job security to those who do not currently have it, to provide our adjunct lecturers with access to health care or a living wage so they might afford it, and to decrease the economic disparities that exist among the different categories of faculty on our campus?
That's a very good question, and not the first time we talked about it today, because before you brought it up, I talked about the need, particularly in a high outreach university like this, to have a diversity of faculty, to have the faculty all feel fully a part of the university and fully on the same sort of level of respect as others. The compensation issues related to adjuncts is a difficult issue that academia is just beginning to wrestle with, but we do need to wrestle with it because it is an important part of the educational experience. So I don't have any solutions for you. I will tell you at George Washington University that I've led, we relied heavily on adjunct faculty, and we had some of these same questions. So I will put that on my list of things that we need to gather a group together and come up with a solution for, because it is important. We do need to make sure that we are having appropriate compensation and support and respect and career paths for those that may not be in a traditional tenure track.
Why isn't it already on the list?
Because it can't be my list, it needs to be our list. And my first 90 days will be spent listening and understanding the concerns of the University of Colorado community. Each of you knows so much more about CU, where its opportunities lie, where its challenges lie than I do. So I'm not one to come in here and say I know everything. I want to make sure that I'm listening to people and gaining the insights that you can bring.
Mr. Kennedy, my name is Richard Engel. I am a donor, an advocate, and in this role as questionnaire, a former alumni president, chapter president from San Francisco. You're talking about a lot about diversity. You're coming from a university whose alumni are primarily concentrated in 2 states. Now you're coming to a school with 4 campuses whose alumni, especially with regard to the flagship school, half the students are from out of state, and with the overall system, over half the alumni live out of the state of Colorado. How would you engage that group of people, both with regard to fundraising, advocacy, and other engagement with the overall university?
If you look at what we do at UND, much of our, more than half of our donations come from out of the state of North Dakota. The places that they're most at are Arizona, Florida, Denver. And so I've been on the habit of coming here regularly. The first step you need to do to make sure you have a strong fundraising effort is be engaging the alumni wherever they are. Not just the major donors, but the alumni writ large. So I understand that we already have a program with our Pac-12 games where we do engage the alumni in the Pac-12 locations on away games. I think that's great. But my guess is that there's a lot of alums that are also in Dallas and New York and Atlanta and Chicago. And I'm going to work with them to figure out, if we don't already have a regular stream of outreach activities to them, how we do that. But fundraising will be probably the top slice of the time that I spend, in reaching out to alumni will be something that I'm very, very focused on.
Mr. Kennedy, you have a 17% approval rating by the National Education Association and a 7% approval rating by the ACLU. Why do you think this is, and do you think someone with those ratings would make a good president?
I would say that as a member of Congress, you have hundreds of people, if not thousands of people, accumulating lists and rating you. I don't know what votes they had on there, but I will tell you that it relates to civil rights, that I have been a strong advocate and am a strong advocate for civil rights. Amongst the bills I passed in Congress was a bill to extend educational private rights to a further segment of the population. I authored a bill and was shoulder to shoulder with Nancy Pelosi pushing for protection of a civil rights advocate in China. We recently got a letter from somebody not prompted by me about the work that I've done working for the Ogaden minority in Ethiopia to make sure that they had protection. I've been a strong supporter of passing in North Dakota, under my leadership, protections against harassment or discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity that is as strong or stronger than what you have here at the University of Colorado. I passed protections as it relates to sexual violence, dating violence, and others, also as under my leadership, as well as whether it be extending the first Spanish language degree program at George Washington University or bringing Martin Luther King Day back to campus at UND. I've always been a strong supporter of civil liberties, civil rights, and will be so here as well.
Kennedy, my name is Troy Ann Gentile, and I'm faculty here on the downtown campus, as well as co-chair for the Faculty Council LGBTQ+ committee. Your CV essentially starts in 2011 with your first academic position at Johns Hopkins, followed by your position in 2012 at George Washington. But what your CV omits is your position as Tim Pawlenty's national treasurer during his bid for the 2012 presidential nomination. So Pawlenty has repeatedly gone on record to oppose all LGBTQ rights, as well as the use of embryonic stem cells, and to promise to appoint judges who will overturn Roe v. Wade. Not only were you his treasurer, but when you lost his bid, or he lost his bid, apologize, you advocated for him to be Mitt Romney's running mate in several news sources, offering as one of the reasons that he should be vice president, quote, he enacted bills and appointed judges to protect life, marriage, and the role of faith in our public square. Mr. Kennedy, what else have you left off of your CV that directly contradicts what you've been telling us all week and could have an effect or be seen as a liability on your potential to fundraise, as well as be a possible embarrassment to CU?
I don't believe there is anything, and I'm not sure that that's resume items, but I have not endorsed Mitt Romney. I have not been involved in any kind of politics in the state I'm in or federally since I am a university president. And I think it's the role of a university president to not engage in those types of politics and truly be representing everybody. So you have my commitment that I'm out of politics.
Mr. Kennedy, just to answer that question directly, and I've heard this being said all week, that in academia, I'm not going to let my politics show in academia, but you had two positions in academia where your politics were showing in a very public way. Why does it make a difference as president versus being in other faculty or administrative roles at a university?
Because the school that I represented at George Washington University was the first and foremost school of applied politics. And one of the things we required is that we wanted all of our professors to both be great professors with PhDs that we hired from Harvard, Columbia, UCLA. And if they're going to teach applied politics, you have to be engaged in politics. And so we, at George Washington University, Graduate School of Political Management, a unique university, encouraged all of our faculty, staff, and students to be involved and engaged in politics. So if you're representing a unique, one-of-a-kind school like that, it makes sense. If you're representing a broad-based university, it doesn't make sense.
Mr. Kennedy, my name is Jacob McWilliams. Hi, I'm right here. I'm the director of the Women and Gender Center here at CU Denver and the Gender and Sexuality Center on the Anschutz campus. And I've been to a couple of your forum presentations, and I've listened to your public radio interview, and I've heard multiple times, I've heard you stumble over the language of diversity and inclusion, and specifically when attempting to use words around racial or ethnic identity, and the term LGBTQ seems to be a hard one for you to say sometimes. And in fact, yesterday when I was at the Anschutz, no, I'm asking a question. When I was on the Anschutz at the forum yesterday, it was so frustrating and painful to me as a queer and transgender person that I had to leave because I was tired of hearing you mispronounce that phrase that's important to me and to the work and to the students that I advocate for. Because I interpret that as either a lack of familiarity or an unease with the language or discomfort, or I'm not sure what it is, but it feels really awkward to me. So I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about what specifically, if you were to be hired to come here, what specifically you would do to educate yourself on the issues that you are less comfortable with around diversity and inclusion, and specifically best practices and promising practices around terminology and practices in higher education.
I'll come back to you.
So thank you for asking that question. I appreciate it. That is a good question. And I need to be a leader for the university to make it a point of differentiation that we are strongly inclusive. So what I'm happy to say is that 2 days ago, yesterday, I reached out to One Colorado and asked them to join a group that would regularly counsel and advise me, that I want to also get other diverse communities to be a representative of that, so that I know what's on their mind. What are the concerns, and listening to them? What are the things that I need to be focusing on and addressing? Because I do believe inclusivity needs to be a competitive advantage for us, and for me to, as you say, educate myself, not just now, but on an ongoing basis, having that community of people from diverse communities advising me is going to help me achieve that. So I'm appreciative of One Colorado stepping up to offer to do that with me, and I look forward to working with them in that regard.
Hi, Mr. Kennedy. My name is Marcus Gallegos. I'm a student here at CU Denver, and I started here 2 years ago. I met my husband here, and thanks to the excellent staff and mentors and faculty, I've been able to start my own business. And this all happened after my parents disowned me. And when no one was there for me, CU Denver was here for me. And so it goes without saying that this establishment, this university and campus is very important to me. And it's a common perception among feeder schools and among the student body that, and these are not my words, but this is a cheap school for minorities. And so your opening statement was very problematic because we should not make that the brand. That idea that we are completely about diversity is degrading to the brand. And so I want you to explain to our regents, because those are the people who are selecting you or not, how are you going to make sure that we are not just the cheap school for minorities?
Let me be clear that we don't want any CU school to be viewed as such. I would say the quality here, remember in that same breath, I said we also need to support the research mission. of CU, which is CU Denver, which is a point of differentiation. I always believe taking the quality path as opposed to the cost path is the better. We're ideally situated and experienced at bringing that high quality education to a wide cross-section of the community, and we want to continue to do that. And it's for exactly the examples that you talked about. We need to have the support organizations and services within CU to make sure that all communities feel welcome and have the support that I'm happy to hear that CU provided you.
Hi, Mr. Kennedy. I'm Phil Joseph from the Department of English. My question concerns the travel ban. We have a lot of international students on our campus right now. We have a lot of visiting faculty from Muslim-majority countries. You've spoken very passionately about inclusivity and diversity. In fact, I think you've said those words at least 10 times. Sometimes I think furthering the goals of inclusion and diversity require taking a public stand. One thing I haven't heard so much about is your willingness to take a public stand. Have you ever said anything in protest about the travel ban and its effects on the University of North Dakota is the first part of my question. And what will you do to protect and defend the rights of international students and visiting faculty from Muslim-majority countries in light of the travel ban?
I'm happy to hear from this community that I'm gathering of advisors to tell me where I need to make a public statement. I think if you really want to do something, you need to go far beyond just signing a letter. I was talking to one of my professors of Iranian immigrant that was telling me about getting a call from somebody at CU that was an English professor asking him about, do you feel welcome with Kennedy on campus? And he says, are you kidding me? I know his wife, he knows my wife, he's been highly supportive. And then the next question he said he was asked about the immigration, about the ban, and about would he be supportive of you if they tried to eject you from this country or not let you travel, to which his reply to me, he says, when I asked you about that, you said if anybody comes after you, you give me a call and I'll get my personal lawyer on it, referring to me committing to get my personal lawyer onto it. So I have been strongly supportive of our immigrant community at the University of North Dakota. Let me just say that we don't understand the Muslim world well enough. We don't have enough interchange back and forth with the Muslim countries and nations, and I think that hurts all of us. I've taught for 6 years in a row at the top business school in Istanbul, Koç University, 65 executive MBAs, 2 8-hour classes in a row. I've been in 10 predominantly Muslim countries, much of them multiple times. I've worked very hard at trying to educate myself in their culture, their identity, and getting more of a connection between them so that we can export our values and better understand them is something that I think we need to be committed to doing. So I'm happy to work with you on those. Yes, I'm willing and anxious to take that public stand and do more than just a letter.
Hello, my name is Shay Swager, and I'm a librarian here at Auraria Library. My question is, providing specific examples, what do you think is the most significant form of structural white supremacy in higher education today, and what specific policies or programs will you advocate to dismantle it? Before I hand that over to you, I'll repeat the question at the end. Before you say that your personal feelings on this matter don't matter in the role as assistant president, I'll add that assistant president has a louder platform than anyone else to call attention to the challenges we face in higher education. And it is the obligation of assistant president to use that platform to advocate for the well-being of students, staff, and faculty. So this question is well within the scope of your responsibilities that you'd be in this job. You've also struggled to establish credibility regarding your commitment to equity, so this question is a chance for you to demonstrate to us that you've done the work. that you've studied, and that you can apply what you've learned to identify and dismantle oppressive systems. To be clear, I'm not asking about interpersonal racism or individual prejudice. I'm asking about structural white supremacy, so please don't answer with how life is a game of addition. I'm asking for specifics. So I will repeat, providing specific examples. What do you think is the most significant form of structural white supremacy in higher education today, and what specific policies or programs would you advocate to dismantle it? Thank you.
I haven't looked at your HR policies. I do note that we maybe don't have as diverse of an audience here as we do of a student body. So is what I talked about earlier a preference to hire from within that perpetuates what we have in terms of diversity, a structural form of white supremacy? In terms of solutions, one of the solutions that we did as it relates to making sure that our community was better is we had an annual survey, first annual survey that University of North Dakota has ever done, of whether you feel welcome and inclusive and safe on campus. Although we did well relative to our peers on the CAB poll, would have pointed out that our teaching was not as inclusive as we could be. And so we created 5 programs to help our teachers understand that when they're teaching something, you're not only talking about white males over 40, for example. And those courses are made available to our faculty and taught, so there are ways that we can both teach ourselves as well as make sure that the faculty is teaching in a way that recognizes the full voices of our history and our present.
Hi, I'm Pam Laird. I've taught here for 30 years. Thank you very much for coming and talking with us. And I wrote down what you said, quality path, not cost path. And partly because I study business, among other things. So I wanted to ask you what your business experience has taught you about being the CEO of a university. 3 of the 4 firms in which you held executive positions either went bankrupt or were subject to hostile takeovers during or shortly after your role there. Now, it may very well be the case that things would have been worse had you not been there. So that's entirely possible. But it is also the case that in the interest of what we call shareholder value, and also salvaging the firms, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of employees were let go. The only people who didn't suffer were the top executives who got their golden parachutes. So what I'd like to know, how does that experience in business translate to running a university? Is it worth decimating the employee population in order to save the institution? Thank you.
Let's go through each of those 3 that you brought up. If you didn't name the companies, we had a previous question in the collaborative governance issue on these 3 companies. First of all, Pillsbury was bought after my time. I had nothing to do with it because my role was acquiring companies, and the companies that I helped acquire, Haagen-Dazs is a crown jewel in the company that now Pillsbury rests in, which is General Mills. Second of all, Federated Department Store is now Macy's. I fought against the hostile takeover, not succeeding the hostile takeover, worked with the management team to be the first ever major retailer to get through reorganization on the other side and preserving the jobs for everybody whose jobs were at risk. And the third is Shopko Stores lasted 2 decades longer than Keldor Bradley's and Venture because of some of the strategic planning I put in place. So I would view all 3 of those from a management perspective to have made the best out of a challenging opportunity. I would also say that from a learning and growing and experience perspective, you learn the most from your mistakes, not your successes. But if you look at it from making the least amount of impact on the employees given the situations at hand, I think my management helped to perpetuate the least negative outcome for all of the employees.
I thank my colleague Pam for a perfect segue into my question as well. My name is Diana White. I chair the Faculty Assembly Budget Priorities Committee here on campus, and I also chair the Faculty Council Budget Committee at the system level. I have a question for you, and I may have a follow-up question for clarity that I'd like to also be allowed to ask. A strength of any leader is the ability to be self-reflective, and as you just commented, the exact words I have written down are to learn and grow. What I would like to talk a little bit about is the fact that at UND, you had to oversee some pretty phenomenal budget cuts coming from the state that affected your institution. No one would ever expect such a process to go perfectly, and my understanding is that based on differences in terminology, your role at UND is very comparable to our role here as a chancellor. And so my question for you, again, keeping in mind my role and my representation here on behalf of faculty governance, is can you give us a really concrete, specific example of something throughout that process of overseeing those budget cuts that you feel like, given another opportunity, you would handle differently, a mistake you made, et cetera, and how you have learned and grown from that?
A mistake I made in that process is that I didn't realize that there'd be budget cut upon budget cut upon budget cut.
I've heard.
So I said that we weren't going to revisit sports again, and my commitment is to never say never again. But two things that I think I would think about. I'm worried because the projections show that in 2025, the enrollment of students is going to peak and start going down. That looks like a budget cut waiting to happen unless we plan for it ahead of time. If you're going through the budget cuts that I've gone through, you never, ever, ever want to go through them again. So part of what I've already talked about is making sure we're having that long-term view so we're prepared for that. Second thing is it's better to have it as bottom-up as possible. We did not have an incentive-based budgeting plan at that time at UND. You do have it here at CU Denver, and I would want to make sure that you have that in place because that helps you to have the collaborative governance process even more effectively using the allocation of whatever cuts may happen. But I think preparing to never have to do the cuts is a better strategy. The fourth thing I would suggest is that we have since that time required all of our colleges to have a 5% budget reserve so that when there is a downturn that they at least have some buffer to keep from it being as severe as it was and I was forced to go through in my first year as president.
Thanks. And just a brief follow-up to that. I appreciate the details that you provided there. I had also been forewarned that you would probably mention that you didn't realize there would be wave after wave and that you would have to, unfortunately, endure as a campus several waves of that. What I'm also trying to get at beyond just the budget cuts is sort of you as a human, as a leader. Can you just share with us anything sort of, and I understand it's very hard to ask somebody to be vulnerable in this public of a forum, but can you show us that side of yourself a little bit? What is something you haven't handled well at some point at UND, et cetera, and how you've learned from that and grown as an individual and as a leader?
One thing I didn't handle as well as I could have was my right-hand person that came with me from 4 years at George Washington University. She committed to 3 years at the University of North Dakota, being African-American female, Democrat, feminist from North Carolina, still single. She wanted to go to a more diverse city. And as I looked to replace her, we looked at her job descriptions and found out that she was doing above what was on her job description, and she was really performing at a chief of staff role. And so even though she's leaving in 3 months, I said, if she's a chief of staff, we should adjust her to chief of staff. And we ought to raise her salary to at least the lowest level of a chief of staff from a gender equity perspective, because sometimes roles get perceived as, if they're historically filled by women, they don't always get the respect they need. Then we did a search to find a replacement for her, and the search didn't find anybody that was better than her. And so I asked her for a 6-month period of time to work remotely. And because I thought somebody might want to have her around, I said, we'll pay for part of your travel as part of that, even though I didn't think it was needed. And that combination would have been lower priced than any of the three alternative salary than that we decided weren't as qualified as her. That caused an explosion in North Dakota, in part because we were addressing gender equity on maybe a single one-off as opposed to more completely, in part because of the budget cuts had caused a suspension of a lot of wage increases, in part because we had silly rules that you can't just promote in place, in part because there wasn't an understanding of working remotely as well as maybe there could be. And although I would have done everything I could to address her gender inequity, I think I would have tried to figure out a bigger, broader way to do that that didn't result in the firestorm that I faced when that happened.
After this question, we have time for two more.
Hi, Mr. Kennedy. My name is Rashawn. I'm a graduate student at University of Colorado, Denver in political science. Thanks for being here. I appreciate that you have a commitment to respecting all levels of our university's leadership and really want a moral leader for this university myself. As I'm sure you're aware, there's sadly been a lot of resistance at basically every level that you could count in our university to your nomination by our regents. Now, I think that there's a lot that's important about a leader being in touch with the will of the people who they lead. And I think that one of the ways that one leads morally is by making sure to gain and maintain the consent of the governed and the people who they're leading. And in light of all the opposition you faced while you've been named as our nominee, I'd like you to reflect. Can you articulate your feelings on whether and what level of opposition would mean that the moral thing to do as a moral leader would be to actually not accept your nomination as president? Is that Can you articulate some of your feelings about what level of opposition might mean that you might need to decline this nomination, or is the level of opposition not actually part of your consideration in weighing this decision up to whether to accept?
I think the measure would be after I've been here 2 years, if I haven't unified the community in the way towards a common vision, that would be something that would make sense. But there are always two sides of every issue. There are always two sides of folks. There are always things that I haven't had a chance to really prove myself on, that I would hope that 2 years from now, you would come back and say, we made the right decision in picking Mark Kennedy for president of the University of Colorado.
You know, to be honest with you, I'm looking at a clock. We've run 5 minutes over. And listen, I didn't hear your question. Excuse me. I did not hear all of your question. So if you have a question for me, I'd be happy to answer you. But I'm being respectful of everyone's time here. And I apologize if I did not hear all of your question. But before I answer anything, I want to make sure I have clearly understood what you've asked. And this was not a question and answer session for myself or the regents, but I am happy to answer your question, but not during Mark Kennedy's time. When he's on a tight schedule, we have already gone over. So I hope you will respect the time and the process. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Mark Skrotsky. I'm part of the Lifelong Learners program here. I understand that you have changed your views since the year 2000 when you were a representative in our United States Congress. I too have changed my views quite a bit. As an example, in 1964, I was 21 years old and made my first vote for president. I voted for Barry Goldwater. Subsequently to that, In 1965, I read Victor Hugo's Les Miserables. It started me on thinking a whole new way about life means and how you live your life. Subsequently, I've been to 65 different countries, lived in many of them. Can you point to some example, maybe like that, maybe not, where you changed your views? What changed it?
Thank you for that question. I would be happy to talk about that. Let me talk to you about something that resulted in me changing my views as it relates to the LGBTQ plus community. Hopefully I got that right. First, my mother did not feel included in her life. She had to go out and pick up frozen cow chips in the winter in South Dakota to go and burn in the house to keep warm. She didn't talk about it much, but it clearly animated her passion for inclusion. So that when we lined up for a school photo every year, every time the first day of school, lined up for a photo, take a photo, she gave me and my brothers and sisters a piece of advice, the same piece of advice every year. Look for the new kid in class. Look for the person that's feeling out of place. Look for the person standing on the edge of the playground that nobody's reaching out to, and reach out to them. She gave us that same piece of advice every year. It only took a few decades for it to sink into me, but it ultimately did. Second thing is that our daughter happened to live in Washington, D.C. at the same time we were at George Washington University. And as she brought her friends over to our apartment, more than half of them were also LGBTQ+. And we welcomed them into the family, got to know them. I could tell you about the many people like Roberto and Paul in my life that have shown me that those in a same-gender marriage can have as much love, as much respect, as much commitment as those in a traditional marriage. The other thing that really has animated me is the understanding as an academic leader that to get to the graduation rate, to get to the opportunity that I had open for me, you not only need to have the financial resources to pay for the tuition, you not only need to have the smarts to pass the classes, but you need to feel included. Because you're not going to stay through here and go through the struggle and the challenges and the hurdles that are necessary to become a college graduate unless you feel supported. So given my passion for extending that to others, all of those things have combined into having me be a passionate advocate for making sure that we're inclusive to all communities. So that is part of the journey that I have traveled and part of what brings me here today.
Final question.
My name is Joanne Addison. I'm the chair of Faculty Council, and I'm a member of the English department here at CU Denver. When you interviewed for the position of president at UCF just last year and were asked about your support for DACA students, you said you would leave your politics at the door. On Monday of this week, you were still checking your politics at the door and not getting involved in anything having to do with DACA unless a member of our community was actually being threatened. But on Tuesday, you said something surprising at the UCCS forum. On Tuesday, you were ready to go to Washington to lobby for DACA students because we need to be engaging our legislative leaders. This sudden turn towards activism is surprising. You've said you don't think there are any DACA students at UND. It's likely there aren't any DACA students because UND doesn't offer DACA students in-state tuition. Given your stated commitment to both DACA students and first-generation students, as well as your assertion that you have been a champion for diversity and inclusion, that's yours phrase, not mine, I'm curious as to why you didn't engage your legislative leaders in North Dakota to secure in-state tuition for DACA students. But here's my question. Given how much your stance on DACA students and other issues has changed over the course of a few days, how are we to trust that you aren't just telling us what you think we want to hear? It is entirely unclear to us who Mark Kennedy is.
If you look at a strategic plan as to how we advance diversity at the University of North Dakota, we had it as one of our 7 goals, and we created specific action steps based on a team. In a collaborative governance area, I don't act alone, I act in a collaborative team. And as they came, they had about 8 action steps, amongst those being making sure that our support for them is bringing them across the line with a higher graduation rate. So do I reach down into a collaborative team and tell them, of the 8 ways you're going to advance diversity, what you do it? No. As a leader, you say, this is a goal that we need to be supportive of, and we need to reach out and work with the collaborative governance mechanism to have them identify what are the priority action steps that need to move forward, of which we've taken many of them, including the first ever survey that I talked about, the training for faculty in terms of teaching in a more inclusive way, the adding the first ever staff to help with the LGBTQ plus community, making sure that we're passing tougher policies. Those are the action steps we've taken. And so I would say that working in a collaborative way, I can't be prescribing actions for those collaborative governance. So let me just say, I think since that was the last question, I want to thank you all for your attention. Thank you all for your interest in this process. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to my story and my passion for what we can do together to elevate even further the ranks of CU Denver, of CU into the greatest universities on the planet. Thank you for having me here today.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for being here today.